In the early 19th century, power did not belong to governments or laws, but to men who owned land. In remote regions where plantations stretched farther than memory, a father's word was final, unquestioned, and absolute. This story begins in such a place, where wealth was measured not only in acres but in human lives. The man at the center of this history was respected publicly and feared privately. He controlled harvests, labor, and punishment with the same cold precision. To the outside world, he was a successful landowner. To those beneath him, he was a system. His daughter was born into comfort, but never into love. From childhood, she learned that silence was safer than speech, and obedience more valuable than affection. In this world, daughters were not individuals. They were extensions of reputation. A mistake made by a child was seen as a stain on a man's name. As years passed, financial pressure and social expectation tightened their grip. Rumors traveled faster than truth, and weakness was never forgiven. The father believed authority was something that had to be demonstrated, not felt. Compassion, in his mind, invited rebellion. As markets shifted and debts grew, he began to see everything through the lens of value. Land had value. Labor had value. Even blood, he believed, could be priced. His daughter, once a symbol of legacy, slowly became something else in his eyes. Not family, not responsibility, but property. The daughter grew older under constant observation, her life measured by usefulness rather than care. She was educated enough to serve, but never enough to challenge. Every movement was judged, every failure remembered. Her father spoke of honor often, yet never spoke of kindness. In his household, affection was weakness and control was proof of strength. Outside the home, enslaved people worked from sunrise to nightfall, their lives regulated by bells and commands. She watched them quietly, learning early that humanity meant little when profit was threatened. Over time, the father's financial stability began to crack. Harvests failed, debts mounted, his standing among other landowners weakened. Where once he commanded respect, he now sensed judgment. Pride turned into desperation. In private, he began to calculate losses the way others calculated weather. And in that calculation, he included his own child. In a society where people were sold openly, legality blurred morality. The father convinced himself that blood did not exempt anyone from economic reality. He told himself this was necessity, not cruelty. He told himself history would understand. When the decision finally came, it was not announced. It was decided in silence, long before any paper was signed. To him, the act was not betrayal. It was efficiency. To her, it was the moment she ceased to exist as a daughter and became something unnamed. The transaction was carried out without ceremony. No farewell was permitted. No explanation was offered. Records would later list her as property, stripped of family and past. Those who witnessed the exchange said nothing, not because they approved, but because silence was survival. The daughter was removed from the home she had known and placed into a world governed entirely by command. She learned quickly that identity had no value where obedience was demanded. Days blurred into routine, and routine replaced memory. What hurt most was not labor or exhaustion, but erasure. She was no longer addressed by name. She was referenced by function. Meanwhile, her father continued his life as if balance had been restored. Debts were reduced. Reputation stabilized. Among his peers, the act was never discussed openly, only hinted at with uneasy avoidance. He told himself order had been maintained, but something had shifted. The house grew quieter. His authority no longer felt solid. At night, he found himself revisiting the decision not with regret, but with justification, repeating the same logic until it lost meaning. Outside, the system continued as designed, grinding human lives into profit. Inside, the cost began to surface in ways no ledger could record. Years passed, and the consequences of the decision rippled outward. The daughter adapted because survival demanded it. She learned to exist without expectation, without hope, without voice. What remained was endurance. Others around her noticed the quiet strength it took to remain standing in a world designed to erase her. The father, however, began to lose control in subtler ways. Authority rooted in fear decays when fear turns inward. His health declined. His temper worsened. Those who once deferred to him now avoided him. Whispers followed him through town, not accusations, but memory. He realized too late that power is never permanent. It depends on belief, and belief fades. When financial hardship returned, there was nothing left to sacrifice. He had already crossed the final boundary. What remained was isolation. The land still existed. The house still stood. But legacy had been destroyed. The system that allowed his decision did not protect him from its weight. History rarely punishes immediately. It waits. It allows time for consequences to mature. As the years continued, change arrived from outside forces the father could not control. Laws shifted. Attitudes evolved. The institution that once justified his actions began to fracture. Records resurfaced. Stories were passed down. His name became associated not with success, but with moral collapse. Meanwhile, the daughter's fate blended into the countless unnamed lives consumed by the same system. Her survival was never recorded, but her existence mattered nonetheless. History is not built only on famous names, but on silent endurance. Scholars would later describe this era as one of calculated cruelty, where legality replaced conscience. The father died without redemption, convinced until the end that necessity excused all acts. But history did not agree. It never does. It observes, collects, and judges long after those involved are gone. What remains is a lesson written in lives rather than ink. In the years following the decision, the father discovered that actions justified by power rarely remain contained. What had once felt controlled began to fracture at the edges. His authority still existed on paper, but its weight diminished in practice. Workers obeyed without respect. Neighbors spoke with caution rather than admiration. The home that once symbolized order now reflected absence. He sensed it most in silence, the kind that lingers rather than comforts. Attempts to restore dominance only exposed insecurity. He told himself the world was ungrateful, that progress had made people forget necessary sacrifices. But deep beneath those rationalizations lay a truth he never confronted directly. Control achieved through dehumanization corrodes everything it touches. The system that had allowed him to trade blood for stability offered no protection when that stability failed. As his influence weakened, memory began to replace fear. People remembered not the man he claimed to be, but the choice he made. Records remained, quiet and impartial, waiting to be rediscovered. And though the daughter's fate was never publicly acknowledged, her absence became a constant, unspoken presence. The father believed history favored the powerful. What he failed to understand was that history does not protect power, it examines it. And as time moved forward, his decision stopped being viewed as necessity and began to be understood for what it truly was. A moment where authority crossed into irreversible moral collapse. As time passed, the story did not disappear, it only changed shape. Those who had witnessed the decision grew older, and with age came reflection. What was once accepted as normal began to feel unsettling when spoken aloud. Younger generations questioned what their parents had endured in silence. The system that allowed such acts relied not only on laws, but on collective agreement to look away. And, slowly, that agreement weakened. The father's estate became a symbol rather than a triumph. Visitors sensed unease in its stillness. Rooms once filled with authority felt hollow, as if something essential had been removed. The man himself aged rapidly, his control slipping in small but noticeable ways. He repeated stories of necessity and survival, but fewer people listened. The world around him was changing, and his justifications sounded increasingly fragile. Meanwhile, the daughter's absence became permanent, not only physically, but historically. She existed only in records, reduced to a line item that never explained the human cost. This was how such systems survived, by removing names, faces, and voices. Yet memory has a way of resurfacing. Stories whispered behind closed doors began to form a quiet resistance, not loud enough to challenge the past, but strong enough to ensure it would not be forgotten. The father believed time would erase his decision. Instead, time preserved it, stripped of excuses, leaving only the truth of what power can do when it is allowed to operate without conscience. Parallel to this personal tragedy, wider societal changes were taking place. Abolitionist movements gained momentum, questioning the very foundations that allowed such transactions to happen. Debates over morality, legality, and human rights echoed in courts, churches, and public squares. The father's story, once isolated, became part of a larger tapestry illustrating the cost of a system built on dehumanization. Laws were slowly rewritten, and attitudes evolved, but the scars left on those who had lived through these events remained. The daughter's experience served as a haunting reminder that the consequences of treating people as property reach far beyond economics. They shape identities, communities, and histories. For many, her story represented the loss of innocence and the price paid when power is wielded without empathy. It challenged viewers and readers alike to confront uncomfortable truths about heritage, justice, and memory. The legacy of one family's cruelty thus became a call for collective reflection and change. As the narrative extended beyond family and locality, it began influencing art, literature, and cultural memory. Writers and artists, inspired by these dark truths, created works that humanized the daughter's experience and exposed the father's cruelty. Poetry, novels, paintings, and songs brought new life to forgotten stories, making them accessible to audiences far removed in time and space. This creative resurgence helped fuel public awareness and empathy, serving as a bridge between past horrors and present-day understanding. By giving the daughter a voice through art, society began to heal some of its deepest wounds. These cultural expressions also highlighted the complexity of human relationships under oppressive systems, showing how individuals navigate survival, love, and identity amidst cruelty. The father's story, once a secret kept in shadows, became a cautionary tale, reminding us of the enduring impact of choices made in moments of desperation and indifference. During this period, descendants of both the father and the daughter faced their own reckonings with history. Some sought to distance themselves from the past, while others embraced it as a source of personal and collective growth. The process of confronting ancestral wrongs was painful but necessary, leading to dialogues about reconciliation, restitution, and the meaning of justice. Community leaders and activists pushed for acknowledgement of historical injustices as a prerequisite for healing. Public memorials, educational programs, and restorative initiatives aim to honor those who suffered and to prevent repetition of such atrocities. The daughter's story became central to these efforts, symbolizing the resilience of those who endured unimaginable hardship. By embracing history's complexities, these descendants contributed to a more honest and inclusive narrative, one that recognizes pain alongside perseverance and failure alongside hope. The legal frameworks that once enabled the father's decision evolve in response to growing awareness and activism. Landmark cases challenged the legitimacy of slavery and human trafficking, setting precedents that reverberated globally. International bodies began codifying human rights standards designed to protect the dignity of every person. Yet, the struggle to enforce these laws remained ongoing, complicated by economic interests, cultural legacies, and political resistance. The daughter's story served as a stark illustration of the stakes involved, the human cost behind abstract legal debates. It reminded lawmakers and citizens alike that laws are not merely words on paper, but shields for those vulnerable to exploitation. As governments grappled with these challenges, civil society organizations played a crucial role in advocating for victims and educating the public. The legacy of the father and daughter thus extended beyond family history to influence policy and conscience worldwide. The story also found new relevance in discussions about identity and human rights today. It underscored the dangers of commodifying human beings and the moral imperative to uphold dignity. Contemporary movements against modern slavery, trafficking, and systemic racism drew lessons from histories like this, emphasizing vigilance and activism. Educational institutions incorporated these narratives into curricula to foster critical thinking and social responsibility among students. Media and technology expanded access to these stories, connecting global audiences and encouraging cross-cultural understanding. The father and daughter's story thus transcended its origins to become part of a universal conversation about freedom, respect, and humanity. This ongoing engagement demonstrated the power of history to inform and inspire present and future generations. Technological advances further transformed how these histories were preserved and shared. Digital archives, oral history projects, and virtual museums made it possible to document and disseminate stories previously confined to local memory. Interactive platforms allowed descendants and researchers to collaborate, reconstructing events and genealogies with unprecedented accuracy. Social media amplified voices that had long been marginalized, creating communities of remembrance and advocacy. These tools democratized history, challenging traditional gatekeepers and enabling more inclusive narratives. The father's story, once hidden in dusty records, became accessible to millions worldwide, sparking dialogue and action. This democratization of memory contributed to a broader cultural reckoning, reinforcing the need to honor the humanity behind historical events. Meanwhile, historians continued to debate and analyze the father's decision within the broader context of economic, social, and cultural forces. Some argued that his actions reflected the brutal realities of his time, while others condemned them as inexcusable abuses of power. These scholarly discussions enriched public understanding by highlighting complexities and contradictions inherent in history. They underscored that individuals operate within systems larger than themselves, yet remain accountable for their choices. The daughter's story served as a focal point for exploring themes of agency, resistance, and survival. This nuanced approach helped bridge gaps between historical scholarship and popular knowledge, making history more accessible and relevant. It encouraged audiences to think critically about past and present, fostering empathy and informed citizenship. Public commemorations and anniversaries provided occasions to reflect on this painful history and its lessons. Ceremonies, exhibitions, and lectures brought communities together to honor those affected and promote healing. These events fostered dialogue between diverse groups, encouraging mutual understanding and respect. They highlighted the importance of remembrance as a means to prevent repetition of injustice. The daughter's story featured prominently in these commemorations, serving as a symbol of resilience and the human cost of oppression. Through collective memory, societies reaffirmed commitments to human rights and dignity. Such gatherings also inspired younger generations to engage with history actively, ensuring that these lessons endure. By situating personal tragedy within communal experience, public commemorations strengthened social bonds and promoted justice. Artistic interpretations continued to evolve, reflecting contemporary concerns and perspectives. Filmmakers, playwrights, and visual artists explored the father and daughter story through diverse mediums, each offering unique insights. These works challenged audiences to confront uncomfortable truths and imagine alternative futures. They fostered empathy by humanizing historical figures and illustrating the complexities of their experiences. Artistic endeavors also served as catalysts for social change, raising awareness and inspiring activism. Collaborations between artists and communities enriched these projects, grounding them in lived realities. This creative engagement ensured that history remained vibrant and dynamic, connecting past with present. The father's story thus transcended mere narration to become a living dialogue about morality, power, and redemption. As digital technology advanced, new forms of storytelling emerged. Virtual reality experiences, podcasts, and interactive documentaries provided immersive ways to engage with history. These innovations enabled audiences to explore historical settings, hear firsthand accounts, and participate in narratives actively. Such approaches enhanced empathy and understanding by making history tangible and personal. They also broadened access, reaching diverse audiences across geographical and cultural boundaries. The father and daughter story, adapted into these new formats, gained renewed relevance and impact. These tools complemented traditional scholarship, creating multidimensional histories that resonate deeply. They encouraged ongoing reflection and dialogue, fostering a more inclusive and just society. Ultimately, the story of the father who sold his daughter as a slave is a powerful reminder of the consequences of unchecked power and dehumanization. It challenges us to confront difficult truths about our past and recognize the enduring impact of injustice. Through remembrance, reflection, and action, we honor those who suffered and affirm our commitment to a more equitable future. This narrative teaches that history is not only about what happened, but about how we choose to remember and learn from it. By listening to voices once silenced and acknowledging stories once hidden, we take steps toward healing and justice. The legacy of this story lies not only in its tragedy, but in its potential to inspire change and deepen our understanding of humanity.